Welcome back to Azure FunBytes. My name is Jay Gordon. Let's get into it.
You can launch servers into your Azure AD, add extensions for popular third-party software, and so much more with Azure. Let's get started creating a new Windows Data Center 2019 VM on Azure. I will first open up a Cloud Shell, then create a resource group where our VM will live. We're asking for Azure Resource Manager to provide us with the latest version of Windows 2019 Data Center Edition VM from the Azure Image Library. We can determine what images are currently available on Azure by running this command.
Hi, my name is Abel, Principal Cloud Advocate and DevOps Lead at Microsoft. Everybody is moving to the cloud, and Azure VMs is a fantastic way to start. If you already have an app running on VMs or even physical machines, lifting and shifting the entire infrastructure into VMs in Azure is a great start. You get massive benefits just by not having to host your own VMs.
Let's take a look at the command we'll invoke. Once I hit enter, this will tell Azure Resource Manager that I'd like to create a new VM within the resource group FunByte. The server will use Windows 2019 Data Center Edition along with the administrative username and password that we've provided. We'll also be able to specify we want RDP open until we lock down our security rules. After a few minutes, our new server will be provisioned along with the public IP. I should be able to just go ahead and RDP in and start viewing my new Windows VM.
And that's it. That's creating a Windows server on Azure. That's right, you've got a VM running the version of Windows you want in just a few minutes. For $200 in free credit or to check out more documentation, check out this link. See you next time on Azure FunBytes.
Oh, I love the song. I'm not going to lie. Hey, it's Jay. Welcome back to Azure FunBytes. I really appreciate it that you're joining me again. This has always been a really cool experiment in trying new things, talking to people, enjoying learning about Azure. And so that being said, I always like to bring in people to be part of what we're going to learn. And so far, I feel like we've been really successful meeting different people across the spectrum of Azure. We've covered a couple different things. And today, I'm going to bring on another one of my fellow Azure advocates, someone I think is super duper cool, all the way from Scotland. Hi, it's Sarah. How are you, Sarah?
I'm good, thanks, Jay. Thanks for having me on the show. How you doing?
No, I'm good. I'm glad you're part of this today. You know, I get an opportunity to do things with people like yourself only so often. And I think it's just because of the way the world is now. But, you know, I think that when we bring ourselves together and we're able to do things a little bit like this, it all kind of shrinks, makes us feel a little bit more together. So sure, we're not in Redmond having a good time, going to the pubs or bars or whatever after. But I think we're really just enjoying what we're doing.
I know it's been such a change from what we normally do as cloud advocates, but I think a bit like yourself, I'm enjoying this new medium and being able to expand myself through the skills that I'm learning. So not just doing the technology part, but doing things like creating graphics and video editing. And yeah, it's super stressful having to do all of this now as well on top of everything else. But I'm going to come out of this whole, hopefully, lockdown situation and pandemic with extra skills that will do me really well in the rest of my job and hopefully in the rest of my career as well. So,
you know, that's really the thing I've been coming away from it is like now I'm a show producer. You know what I mean? Like I'm a live Twitch show producer. Yep. I am also a video editor. I'm a community advocate online. But I'm still trying to do things that I think you and I have always done, is that we just want to help people understand this. And so you wouldn't go that far. What do you say? We've got our regular viewers as always. Thank you very much. If you have any questions for myself or for Sarah, please feel free. But before we really get into the whole technical mumbo jumbo demo portion, because obviously today we're going to build a Windows server and then we're going to do some things with it. We've got some problems to solve, and we like to talk about that once we get solving with those problems. But right now, I want to learn a little bit about you.
Okay.
you're like everyone else that does this. You're super interesting. And we've had some conversations, but nothing too in depth. So I've got a few minutes before we kind of dive in. So let's talk. First of all, you've been in technology for a while, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think probably about 14 or 15 years since I graduated from university, Jay. So feels like a lifetime.
I don't doubt it. I think it's been about 22 since I dropped out of my university. So I gotcha. But yeah, you've got a lot going into your career, going way, way far back. I looked at your LinkedIn just to kind of get an understanding of some of your experience. And it looks like you did a lot around Windows.
That's always been what I've learned on. That was the first kind of PC that I got. That Windows like 95 and XP were the machines that I learned on. And then I kind of graduated when I went into actual working in IT departments. It was all Windows based, Server 2000 and upwards from there. And it's always been just what I've enjoyed. And I don't want to sound big-headed, but it's just come naturally to me, Jay. Things like coding or Linux machines didn't necessarily. That, some say I prefer the GUI interface, and that's kind of the lazy way of IT, but it just, that's what I enjoyed, and that's why I've stayed in IT for so long, to be honest.
And it's gone so much further than just the GUI, let's be honest. Windows is advanced so much. I'll be honest with you. I'm using a Windows computer as my local workstation nowadays. I had not used Windows regularly, I don't know, for 15 years. I just refused. I became one of those Linux converts of the desktop. The year of Linux on the desktop was me 15 years ago. And then eventually, like a lot of people, especially a lot of Linux users, we moved to Mac because it becomes something that we understand because it matches the server environments. Like using a local Linux workstation made sense to me because it was the same or very, very close to what I already know. So I kind of get what you're saying. I didn't really have the idea of like where to code, what to code, as much as I knew how to write scripts to support the servers and then write little supportive code, not write big software, really big applications. So I get what you're talking about.
I don't think I properly started to get into scripts or coding until Exchange kind of 2010 started to rule out the GUI, and we had to use PowerShell, and we were going down that route, and that's really where my journey started, going from there and having to relearn all of those skills that I kind of ditched from college, and that's where it's grown from, and that's why you'll find me writing bits of script to try and do things on the cloud as well, and do all of that. So although it's not my natural thing, I still dive into it now and again.
Yeah, I think that one thing that's nice is that with Azure, you get a kind of similar experience that you almost kind of do with almost any modern operating system. And I like to think of Azure like a cloud operating system because there's all these different things that make up a giant computer. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so what's really neat is that Azure gives you the ability to do things through a GUI or do things through scripting or just some command lines. So I really appreciate the fact that there's this kind of environment for people that understand it a little bit from what they've done in the past.
Okay, it's great. I remember when I first started using Azure, it was purely the portal that I used. And then I actually moved job, and the person that I was working with, he was like yourself, a bit more Linux based, and he did a lot of things around the command line, whereas I came from that Windows background and used PowerShell. So we always would challenge each other to, create a resource group, create virtual machines, create whatever it was in our native language. He did CLI and I did PowerShell, and then we saw which one was better, and we would be teaching each other the new skills and finding the kind of holes or the bugs or the bits that scripting language couldn't get. So that's when I really started to look at, sometimes you may have to use CLI, and I'm going to have to learn this, and I can't just get away with using PowerShell, and just kind of grew from there. And hopefully I taught him a bit of PowerShell as well along the way.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing with doing things, I think, in Bash and using AZCLI. There are ways to script everything that you want to accomplish, even if it's just a singular event. You don't need it to be idempotent. You just need a thing to happen.
Yep.
I've got a lot of little scripts like that around things. If I want to create an Azure Kubernetes server and I want to have an ACR, I want a service principal, and I want it all rigged up together. Like I've got some like clean and dirty bash. I call it clean because it's good bash, but it's dirty because it's not the way everybody wants to have it done nowadays. So let's bring up No Nonsense asks, as an old developer turned system admin, the introduction of PowerShell was a huge relief. I can see that, and I think being able to do things through like a programming language really can make it a little bit more understandable for someone who's got to do administration, because you understand things through code, can understand manipulating systems through code. At least that's the way it works for me.
Yep. And being able to do it in PowerShell or whatever language you're familiar with is great for transitioning, right? So moving to the cloud is a big kind of leap for a lot of people who are used to that on-prem environment. Although there's lots of things in Azure that are similar, there's a lot of things that are different, right? So if there's one thing that's familiar to you, and whether that be PowerShell, it's great because you can kind of stay in your comfort zone as well as growing into this new world as well. So yeah, I love the flexibility. I love that you can use whatever you want to deploy resources and manage those resources, and it gives people a lot of comfort, I think, as well. And
so that kind of leans into what we're going to be doing. We're going to be creating some resources. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Sarah, while I get started, let me ask you one thing. What brought you to Microsoft?
It was a kind of natural and weird progression, to be honest, Jay. So a few years ago, I started looking at Azure, and there was no community engagements, right? There was, back when I was starting to learn Azure, there wasn't great documentation, there wasn't a great community, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to learn how to do this, and because there was no community in the area I live in Scotland, I formed a user group, the Glasgow Azure user group. And from there, I just suddenly became involved in the community and started to evangelize the cloud as I was learning as well, and deploying in the customer environments. And I kind of got noticed from that. And my manager, Rick Claus, kind of reached out and was forming a team full of IT pro cloud advocates. And to be honest, that was kind of the transition that I got to where I am now. There was a step in between that. I didn't actually join Microsoft as a cloud advocate. I came as a cloud solution architect.
Gotcha.
But although I enjoyed that, and that was an awesome team, I think my community work just became more of a passion for me. And I wanted to speak to more people than just individual customers that I was assigned to in that cloud solution architect role.
Yeah, and so as a CSA, Cloud Solution Architect, you were working more with, businesses, am I right? Or
Yep. Some of our big customers, internationally recognized names, which was great experience and great exposure, trying to help them and solve their problems. But I kind of didn't like just speaking to one customer. I wanted to speak to lots of people at the same time and kind of spread that knowledge and not just have it just funnel down to one person.
I know those feels. I absolutely understand. I think one of the best things about what we do is the reach, being able to reach so many different people. I think that in itself it makes it great. So we're going to be talking today about something I know is near and dear to your heart.
Yep.
Infrastructure as a service, IaaS.
Yep.
Why don't you give us the quick rundown? Why don't you?
So IaaS, or infrastructure as a service, is kind of what you're familiar with. If you look at after on-prem environments, it's really just servers. It's servers hosted in the cloud. And probably some of our marketing people are cringing because I'm explaining it very simply, but that's what it is, and you shouldn't look at it as something different. Like I said earlier on, I know the cloud can be very scary when you start to get into it, but IaaS is a great way to start your journey on into the cloud. You can lift and shift your current environment and just take your servers that you currently have on-prem and put them into Azure and almost manage them nearly the same as you do on-prem and interact with them. You've still got that operating system, you've still got the disk to manage, you've still got the networking. it's just a different way of managing them. But yeah, that's kind of how I think I would explain IaaS.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I really feel like I need to, I don't know, thank you for all that even more. Like, we need to record that and make sure that the company provides that as like the answer. But no, I agree. It's just being able to do things like VMs. VMs is just the simplest thing that we can use in the cloud. Yep. And I think you said something to me about what we're going to build is that we need to teach people that these VMs, they're just computers. The same thing we're used to. And so if you would like to do something that'll really help you along, I'm going to go ahead and share this. It's in the show notes, but I'm going to shorten it, and I'm going to share it in our chat. This is a really great Microsoft learning path where you can find a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today, about creating a VM and then making modifications, getting it ready for our eventually deployment and production. And then finally, we're going to find out how to make sure it doesn't cost a whole ton of cash, because none of this is free. I mean, for Sarah and I, it kind of is, but that's because we are cloud privileged. Thank you very much, Dr. Microsoft. Actually, let's thank Clippy.
I wish we could bring Clippy back.
I do too. So, like everything in Azure, we have to create a resource when we're going to create a virtual machine. So what we're going to do is just click from the main portal, create a resource. And so we need a Windows virtual machine that we're going to make some noise with today. What do you say? What version do you think we should use?
Oh, it's probably going to have to be 2019 since that's the latest one, Jay.
Okay, Windows 2019. Actually, wait, let's do it this way. Can I just click this one and then just change the image?
You should be able to.
All right, so let's do that. Let's just see. So you should be able to just click Microsoft Windows. Please, this isn't because Azure is slow. This is because my browser is slow. My computer is slow. Trust me, I have a much faster computer on the way. Thank you for all bearing with me. Okay, so let's see. We want to use, we can browse all the images that are available. Yep. So what do you say, 2019 data center?
Yeah, that should be a good one.
Okay, so now we'll get started. We're going to use my subscription. That's where we're going to draw cost from. And then we're going to create a resource group. I'm just going to base the resource group on a new name of any kind. So we'll just call it the AFB, Azure FunBytes Win. Sound cool? Easy?
Yep.
Because we're creating a resource, and so we need a place to keep our resource. So we're going to keep them there. So we're going to create a virtual machine. We need to give it a name. The hardest thing sometimes in technology is naming things, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Naming conventions. I've had some weird naming conventions in my career. We once called all of our servers after Star Wars characters. And Star Trek characters. Actually, that just shows you how geeky some of us are.
Names have power, and I kind of can agree that, whereas, sometimes when you name a host something, you're going to remember it. That's not always great, especially in the context of the cloud, but people like to pick memorable things. So let's pick a region that we can actually build in. We'll pick East US. And when I say a region we can actually build in, it's because it's closer to me, so I love it. And then we'll pick our size of our hardware, which will also include our license for Windows. That's a really big part of all this. I'm going to go ahead and pick this bad boy right here, right? Okay, we've got, like I said, we're cloud privileged. So today, I'm going to go ahead and share a password between the two of us. What's really cool, Sarah, is that we've got this little private chat. And so I'm going to just put a random password that we'll be using to log into this machine in that chat. So if you need it, which you will when you eventually bastion in, you can just go ahead and copy that.
Okay.
So we'll leave the username as Azure user. We're going to put in this password. Now, the one thing we're going to not do, and so you mentioned this to me when we were talking earlier, we don't want to even open up RDP. Let's leave it alone because we're using Azure Security Center. And so Azure Security Center states that we cannot have open to world RDP. It's not possible. So I'm just going to set this to none. And I'm going to say that we don't already have a server license. We're going to just use the one that Azure provides us.
Okay.
That's all built into the cost that you do as you pay by the minute. So we're not going to add any disks because we don't need them. We're just doing a demo. But if we need more disks, we can get them here. Networking, we want to use the standard virtual network, but we need actually to create another part of it. We're going to do that after the initial build. So while that's building, we'll create a bastion as a way to actually log in. But if we wanted to, we could create a security group. We can go within this security group and we could actually add IP-based rules. But I'll be honest with you, we really don't want to do that. So this rule right here, we totally would not want this. And I'll show you all real quick. We really don't want this. We don't want this open to world. But if we had to open it up to an IP address, we could click IP addresses. I could go here to my computer and I can do curl ICANN as IP.com. Come on, there we go. I got my IP address. And so what I can do then is just take this IP. And so we're going to be able to have a default rule. We're going to set the priority to 001, default allow RDP. So we're going to do this as just in case. If I can't get into Bastion for some particular reason and I need to get in from my local computer, we're set up. All right, we're not going to use a load balancer, right?
Okay.
I don't see a reason. We're just doing a demo.
Yeah.
Management, this is all really useful stuff. Like I said, we're using Azure Security Center. That's giving us a bunch of security policies by default that's been set by our domain administrator. We can leave on our boot diagnostics. But one thing I am going to do, I don't want to turn backups on. We don't need backups. Why?
Because it's a demo.
Thank you. See, we got you. So now custom data. Here's something that I don't understand custom data on Windows VMs. Can you explain that to me while we finish this up?
Oh, you put me on the spot now, Jay. I've never used this feature.
Okay.
Because I don't understand it either. And
Okay.
Listen, I'm saying that because I want to tell people that even as cloud advocates, we don't know everything. Like,
yeah, I understand it from a Linux standpoint because it's just bash. You can just shove bash into that section and it'll just run it. I just don't know how to do it. But what I do think you can teach me a little bit about are desired server states. Is that what it's called? Or DSCs?
Yeah, desired state configuration.
Oh, desired state configuration. That's what it is. I think we're going to talk a little about that, right?
We can do, yeah. We can talk about anything tonight, Jay.
Okay. Great. So we went ahead and we validated all the things we wanted for our virtual machine. So all those things that we selected, our password, all that stuff is going to be in here. And so it's going to go through the deployment process. And once it's all finished, we'll be able to go ahead and start working with it. But I really think we need to move forward because I don't think you'll be able to Bastion from your side. So the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to give me your IP address into the chat, and I'm going to give it so you can RDP in. And so just so that we're doing something just to make it so that there's a Bastion service where you can actually create another private subnet in your virtual network. That subnet will then allow you to use a web browser-based method of logging in. And so that's really, really powerful because you don't need to use remote desktop. In the case of doing it this way, we are going to need remote desktop. So we're going to go into this virtual network that we have here. And if I'm right, we're going to go to the network interface. And here we'll get all the information about the private IP. But what we're eventually going to want to do is make a modification to the network security group. So what we'll do is we'll go to the resource group. And just like we did before, how we made that modification to the IP address, we'll be able to just do the same thing. All right, so let's go in here to the NSG, the Network Security Group. I am going to go and grab that lovely, lovely IP address you've given me. So we're going to go here to inbound security rules. And then once this is up, why don't you go ahead, you RDP in, and then you go ahead and share your screen, and you can kind of talk us through the next steps. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to hide your IP address just for the sake of not letting everybody see your IP. So I'm just going to remove my screen for a second. And while I'm removing my screen, why don't you tell us some of the things that you've been up to lately since you've been home and working on, your advocacy from home?
So because we can't obviously travel, I actually reached out on Twitter to my followers and said, I'm available for presenting at user groups. Come grab me, come book a slot, come let me speak to your audience. And I was blown away by this response. So thank you to everybody that responded. And I've been fortunate enough to have about 13 odd user groups I'm speaking at or podcast or shows like your own, Jay, over the summer, and that's great because I'm able to reach audiences that I probably wouldn't have been able to reach even if we were allowed to travel. So last night I was speaking to a user group based in Africa because the time zones worked out really well, and I think last week I spoke to a group in Singapore as well. So it's been great speaking to these different communities and also being able to still hone my skills as a presenter, even though I'm doing it in my home office. While I've been at home. So, and it's still given us that great contact because we all miss human contact, right? And although it's not great having this virtual interface that we have to do it in nowadays, it's still great to be able to speak to people and meet new people and hear their thoughts on the Azure products and where they are and the good and the bad around that so that we can action that feedback as well.
Yeah, I really feel what you're saying there. I'm kind of in almost the same place myself of just how do I help people? How do I reach communities? How do I make sure those communities are well served? And am I sharing information that people actually really care about? And I think that that's one of the more important things. Like, people want to learn interesting stuff. They just don't want to be talked to. So I've gone ahead and added Sarah's IP address, and now we have this IP that's public and ready to go. She can now RDP into the machine and kind of give us a walkthrough of what's next. So I'm going to remove myself. I'm going to let you RDP in, and then why don't you share when you're ready to. I really like this cloud background. I think it makes you. I didn't feel like using my green screen today, but I like using, like, this cloud background with my green screen. I think it looks really nice.
Cool.
Alrighty.
So I should just be logging in. So as you'll be able to see when I'm logging in here, it's an identical Windows Server interface. There's nothing different. We're getting that usual pop-up to confirm the network, and we click yes. And Server Manager's launching. So Server Manager should be kind of something that you're familiar with if you've been using some of the more modern Windows Server operating systems. And it looks no different. It acts no different to a server if you provisioned it on-prem. We've got the same abilities to add and remove features, so the roles and the features. I'm getting ahead of Server Manager. But you can add roles and features just the same way that you do on-prem with your server. There's nothing different to this. So at this point, the server doesn't look any different. So yes, it's hosted up in the cloud and it's hosted in the East US Azure data center, but you can just interact with it and behave like you would any other server. And I think that's the great thing about it. You don't have to treat it any differently. You probably don't have to use a different tool. I know we talked about Azure Bastion and being able to interact with it, but you can RDP into this. You can just, you're not having to relearn something. You're not having to use different tools. You're not having to go off and find different downloads and install them all on your PC and jump through multiple hoops. And I think that's great, right? Especially from a beginner's point of view. So to be honest, the server is ready. If you wanted to use it in your production environment, you would do the same things you would do with any normal server. So if we had a domain, we'd go in and join it to the domain, and then hopefully we put it into the domain, we put it into the right group policy, the OU group in your Active Directory. It would get all your group policies down. It would start to customize it. If that wasn't how you did your virtual machines and you didn't deploy your servers, you could take this machine and then start to customize it. So if you wanted to install your antivirus software, or you wanted to customize the background, or you wanted to uninstall Internet Explorer and install Edge on it instead, or whatever you wanted to do to customize this, you could. And then you could capture that as an image. So when I used to manage servers on-prem, especially in VMware and Hyper-V environments, I'd often have templates, right? So I'd have those templates that had all my customizations within the server, and then I could easily deploy them. And we can do that in Azure as well. There's nothing different about it, Jay. We can treat these just like we do our on-prem servers.
And that's the same with how we scale them. We can eventually create, say, similar redundant sets to ensure that if one fails, the other one can come back, but that they're idempotent so that if you run a command and it runs against a series of machines, it's not going to. So I love the fact that it's still Windows, and if you're doing Windows IT within your organization's data center for years, or that closet, which a lot of people know the closet, that a lot of this kind of transitions fairly easily for you. And I think it's a lot of times it's more about understanding how the pieces fit together on the cloud side. The Windows side should make sense to people.
Yes, it shouldn't be any different for you. What I've pulled up here is, again, something you may be familiar with if you've been imaging machines on-prem, is the Sys Prep. So if you wanted to take this image, this blank server that we've created, then customize it. So install, like I said, your antivirus tools, any patches, any software, and then use that as your template in your image. What you would do is do all of that, and then you'd still have to run Sys Prep. So you'd have to generalize it, take away some of the, the GUIDs and the IDs that these servers have, so that it becomes that out-of-box experience, so as it becomes a fresh install that you can then template. Does that make sense, Jay?
I think it does, and please thank you for dealing with me playing with my producer software.
That's okay.
But yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. So let's say that I'd like to have .NET Core. One of the things that come up, is there a way through this Sys Prep methodology you can show me to just have that as boom, it's ready? And then is there a way to kind of have that ready upon boot time? So when I was going through that process of configuring, I know I did it all through the GUI on the portal, but would there be ways of having some of these things ready at boot time, say through like the CLI?
So you can do it. Like I said, the first way you probably could do it is create that image. So install your .NET framework and then create an image and create the template. Or you could start to use some of the power of the cloud, for a lack of a better word, and use extensions. So you can use extensions to spin up your virtual machine just like you did, and then once that virtual machine's spun up, a script would run afterwards that would do the install of your .NET, and that's kind of what desired state configuration.
Can I bring up extensions for everybody real quick?
Yeah, on you go. That's kind of what the desired state configuration does. So it basically checks all of your servers against them and says, do you have these prerequisites installed? You know, do you have .NET Framework installed? Do you have group policy management installed? And if not, I'm going to install it so that it then creates everything and has that baseline.
So from what I know of extensions, and so I guess this is, you know, cross-platform and a very, very neat kind of part, is so I'm doing this after the fact, but we could have done this at boot on startup. We could have picked some of these generic agent-based extensions, but I think what you're telling me is this right here, this PowerShell desired state configuration. Is that right?
Yep. So you could actually use that one or the one below the custom script extension and use another script. But yeah, either one of those extensions would have done it. Or you pass the Puppet one as well. That's obviously one that we could do the configuration with.
Sure.
So there's multiple ways, and I'm going to say to skin the cat. I hope that phrase translates.
I'm a dog person, it's fine.
But yeah, there's multiple ways of doing this in the cloud, and sometimes that's the hurdle around picking which method should I use. And I always say use the one that you're comfortable with. Don't necessarily go with the one that myself or Jay wants to use.
Gotcha. All right, sorry about that. I didn't realize you had that. So
No, you're right.
Here we go. Now we've got this server manager dashboard, and if we want to add, say, .NET Core or the framework, you can go ahead and just pick it right from there like you would on any other old Windows machine. Next, last, and then finally install, and we'll have that framework. Now, one of the other problems that you really wanted to help me solve today, and after we get through this, is we can do that, because we've solved our first two real problems. Is one, how do we create a Windows machine, and what exactly does it do as a VM in the cloud? So we've got that. It's just a plain old Windows machine, no different. And then after that, we needed to know, how do you actually start making this server ready for production? So in the extensions, we've seen there's a number of different pieces of different tools that you can use. So if you're a Chef person, if you're a Puppet person, you could easily do prep of your servers that way. If you're an Ansible person or one of those other bigger tools, and you want to do something agentless or Terraform or whatever, ARM, even ARM, Azure Resource Manager, these are all ways for you to actually build those servers. Then you can use these same tools, these ARM, these custom scripts, Puppet, Chef, you name it, to actually configure everything on the machine. Or, like Sarah said, you can create a gold master image. There's a plus and a minus to this. Obviously, a plus is you've got really a fine-grained control over what boots up every single time. You always know it. The downside is there's a little bit more keeping up-to-date patch management, always making sure that so rather than using automated processes when the server just first boots up and then doing all your configuration management like a Chef or a Puppet, you're basically saying, you know what? I know what's exactly ready to go. This is the patch level I want. 0 days, you can get hit with something nasty, but for the most part, it's something that should be fairly useful, not a big deal, but I think the thing I would worry about are like 0-day exploits.
Yeah, there's obviously benefits and disadvantages to it. So again, there's multiple options, whatever you're comfortable with using, whichever practice you need. I know some companies prefer maybe the gold image because of the way they audit and the way they want to keep their environment so tight, depending on, I remember, for example, there was a bit of software for a call management service that we ran, and we had to keep our patch level at a certain level because the vendor didn't support newer patches, which was a risk. But in order to make that call center software run, we had to stay at a level, and that's why we had gold master images for that service. So if we had to redeploy it, we were within that vendor's requirements. So again, there's different ways of doing this, but the great thing about it is you have options and you can play around with those options as you skill up and learn and play with it that way.
Gotcha. So do you have a VM you can help us or on your portal that you can maybe show some of the cost analysis stuff? Like, all right, cool. Let me bring you back up into the...
Cool.
So the next thing we really need to talk about, and Sarah's going to help us out with a little bit, is I'm gonna take a step back and let her really show off. One of the things she knows well is once you've got a bunch of VMs, they're not going to be free.
No.
They're not. So now we need to start thinking about cost management, because the more we get into these heavy usage around virtual machines, the more you're going to start seeing cash really add up, and a lot of that gets forgotten in lift and shifts.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know about you, Sarah, but I've had situations where someone says, just put it in the cloud. And so you get the same kind of hardware, you don't really optimize it, and then your boss says to you, why does it cost 6 times what it used to in the data center? You told me to put it in the cloud.
Yep.
And that's the pitfall a lot of people run into. So I'm going to let you kind of talk a little bit more about this wonderful thing known as saving money.
Yep. I think I'm quite passionate about teaching people around some of the cost management in cloud, because I've unfortunately been involved with customers where they have been lifting and shifting into the cloud, and unfortunately they didn't optimize, like you said, some of their VMs, and they spent all of their budget within the first 6 months for that year. So it's not a great position to be in. So I always say, when you start using the cloud, even if you're just spinning up a trial subscription, you should start to set up some cost management budget alerts, right? So that you know that, if your budget is $10 a month, set up an alert so as you know that, and you're being mindful of that. And it's no different to how we might budget for the petrol in our car, or how we spend money on our lunch, right? We'll have our kind of lunch budgets as well. So within Azure, we have the cost management tool here, and you can see my subscription. So I've been running up different virtual machines. I've got some Hyper-V hosts, I've got some disks, I've even got a Cosmos DB in there, and you can see the breakdown of that cost. If we go into kind of cost analysis, we can break down some of those costs and look at it in a more granular way. Takes a wee while to load.
Like I said, it's not our computers. It's not Azure, it's our computers.
I know. It's always 10 times slower when you're watching it, right?
And streaming from your computer to some sort of service at the same time.
It doesn't help. So here I've got a breakdown and a kind of budget of where I'm going to be going. So right now I'm spending about $64 a month. At the end of this month, Azure is forecasting that if I continue on my spending traits, I'll hit the $250 mark. And probably if I did that, I'd be getting an email from my boss saying, what are you doing within Azure? So I really want to start to look at that and manage that. And I can do that by drilling into some of these and seeing what the services are that I've got. So I can see that a big chunk of my cost is based around storage. So I probably need to look at what I'm storing and probably delete some of my MP3 files that are up there.
or even move some of it into, say, something like a blob.
Yep, cold storage, put it into archive storage, stuff that I'm not needing. But yeah, you can see that's where the costs are coming. And over here on the right-hand side, we've got a breakdown of what resource groups are. So I can see that the resource group I've got for migration, so I'm currently working on some migration demos, is costing a fair chunk. And then I've got speaking feedback forms and various different things. So again, you've got that ability to break it down. So if you saw horrendous cost, you can actually see it and try and dive into it and find out what the cost is. But what I want to show you is how to set up a budget alert, so as you know before that email, that scary bill comes in attached to your credit card or wherever it may be going.
I sometimes need a budget alert for just, like, I don't know, buying records. So maybe having one for my cloud, it makes even more sense. Thank you very much.
So you click on the budgets and we click on add, and it's fairly straightforward in terms of creating this budget as well. So we can scope the budget differently. So we can scope it for our entire subscription, or we could scope it for a resource group, or different levels of detail. So depending on where you want that budget to be. In this case, I want it to be my overall subscription. So I'm going to give this budget a name. So I'm just going to call it the monthly budget. And again, you can reset this budget for monthly or quarterly or annually, again, depending on where your budget's coming from and how you want to monitor that spend. We're going to go with monthly. You can have a creation date, so you can set it so that it doesn't create now. If you wanted it to start, next month, if that's when your financial year started, whatever. You could also have an expiry date. I'm going to leave it with the defaults at the moment. And what we want to do is put in a budget amount. And you can see here that Azure's suggesting a forecast budget for me. 174 is maybe a little too high for me, so I want my budget around 150. But we've also got that breakdown, so we can see that I traditionally spend more than that 150, and I'm going to probably burst my budget on those months, but it's great because it keeps me in check, right? I don't want to be spending too much. And obviously you can adjust this accordingly as well, but you can see also there's months where I didn't spend 150, so probably does even itself out. Anyway, that's the information that you've got, so you can help base your budget if you didn't know what it was around setting that as well.
And also just want to say, if anybody watching has any questions on cost management, please feel free to pop it. Thanks. Go ahead, Sarah.
Cool. So what you want to do is, now you've set that budget, you want to set the alerts, because there's no point in having a budget if you're not alerted to it, right? So you can set it at different levels. So I want to be alerted at 70%. So once it hits 70%, I want a kind of email to say, Sarah, you've hit 70%, what you doing? Have a look at it, so that I've got that growth. So if I'm, on holiday or whatever, or it's in the middle of the night, I've got time to action it before I hit my 100%. What we want to do is actually attach it to an action group. So I've not... Well, you can attach it to an action group. And what an action group is either a group of people, so it could be a distribution list, and you can send an email out to them, or you can have an action, say, like an automation runbook. Now, this is not something I would recommend for production workloads, but what I've seen a lot of customers do is set up an automation runbook that actually runs a script that stops or even deletes all of your resources so that you don't spend any more of that budget. And that's why I say you don't want to do that in production, because the last thing you want to do is automatically delete or stop all of your resources in production. But it's a great way of stopping that test environment. If something's gone wrong, you can quickly kick off that runbook, and it just kills everything, stops everything dead, and the budget doesn't go any further or any higher. So we're just going to set it up as an email. So I will put in my email address. And that's it. I click create, and that's that budget created. So it will kick off an alert for me at that 70% mark, email me, and then I'll be able to action it. Here, once it kind of refreshes in a bit, we'll be able to see the progress of where I am. So if I wanted to come in the portal, if I was doing something else, I can double check and get that visual result for me, or I could just wait for that email to kind of come in and look at me. And this is something I recommend you should do with all your subscriptions when you start off, regardless of whether it's a test subscription or whether it's your production one. Start to set up those budget alerts so that you get into really good practice to start off. And if you start off in a good footing, then your cloud journey will be so much easier.
Well, it looks like we've got a lot more information about just making sure we don't spend. That's for sure. Are there ways to rig this into other alert systems, like, say, PagerDuty or something like that, or VictorOps? Like, I know people will want to eventually make these actionable.
Yep. So we have plugins that can plug into some of the service desk tooling. You can actually log a ticket, and then your help desk can pick it up. Or you could send out SMS text messaging. You can send out emails. You can send out... There's a whole host of connectors when you start to look into it, Jay, depending on how you want to alert it. You probably don't want to be sending the text messages at 2 a.m. when you've hit maybe 50% of your budget. That's probably more appropriate for logging a ticket in your service desk, and they'll pick it up the next morning and then obviously escalate it to the right people. But equally, you could set up an alert that said servers down, and then and then send those types of messages to pagers and SMS text messages. But yeah, your budget one probably doesn't need to go out to your on-call engineer at 2 a.m. in the morning.
So we got a few minutes left, and I'd like to show everybody, if you don't mind, maybe we could just create another network for the Bastion. What do you think?
Yeah. Do you want to do it, or do you want me?
Yeah, I could do it. You can kind of talk me through if you want me to as well. I've done it before, but all right, so let's do this. So we're back in our virtual machine that I created before, and I want to be able to administrate this machine. I don't want to do it via RDP. I just want to be able to get in by a Bastion server. So what I'll do is go to my VM. I don't know why it looks like so awful right now in the portal, so I'm just going to refresh so it'll render properly in the screen. I apologize for that. That looked terrible.
Okay.
That's what happens when you refresh on the fly and you don't have proper scaling. Okay, sorry. I'm trying to make more cloud jokes. All right, so what we're going to do is we can go to Connect, and we can see this section right here called Bastion. And a Bastion host is kind of a term in technology for a machine to get into other machines. That's really it. Some people call it a jump box. Other people call it a Bastion host. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a subnet. That's a network that we're going to use just to connect. To do this, we need to make an additional change to our virtual network. So we actually have to go to a new tab here for networking. I've got this right so far, don't I?
Yep.
Because what we need to do is we have to add another subnet of IP addresses that we can actually allocate.
Yep.
So if we go to network, actually I'm in the wrong spot. I need to go to the actual virtual network.
Yep.
And so if I go here to, I believe, address space, this is right now the only subnet that we're permitted to connect to. And then this is natted eventually to our public IP address, but we need another range. So what I'm going to do is just add the next subnet available, another /24. Just copy that IP range because we'll need it again for the Bastion. And we'll just hit save. And so now we have a second IP range that we can actually use to create this Azure Bastion subnet. So we'll create manage subnet configuration. We'll click subnet. This will be the subnet we can actually connect. So what is that? Azure
Bastion subnet.
Cool. And then the IP range is the range that we just created that network for.
So that actually needs to be a /27, Jay.
Oh, okay. So let's make it a 27. Boom. So now we have 27 IPs and 5 reserved addresses to add to connect to machines through this Bastion host, correct?
Yep, that's right.
And we don't need to create a security group or anything like that because why?
It's a demo.
Still on. Okay, so now if we go here and we've added this subnet, we've now got a subnet to actually connect to our Bastion for. So we can go back to the virtual machine. Clicky here. We'll go ahead and click connect, Bastion again. We'll use Bastion. And so now that we've got a network, we've got everything ready to go, we'll click create. And it'll actually start creating the Bastion host. So this is kind of like a virtual computer. Like all these are virtual computers. What the hell am I talking about? But it's another type of host that has a virtual network connected to all the machines that we actually have within our virtual network. Yes. And then from that, we can actually connect to our server via remote desk protocol, but we're not going to do it from our local computer here. We don't need to create any additional network rules. We can just connect via here through the browser, and we'll get something similar to a remote desktop protocol session.
Yep. And the great thing about the Bastion box is, although it's another server or computer, you don't actually have to look after, I want to say, the outside layers of it. You just connect in. You don't have to patch it. You don't have to shut it down. You don't have to start it up. We take care of all of that because it's a PaaS service as well.
Yeah. So I think we should wrap up. What do you think?
Yeah.
So I'm going to put on a little my theme music. Is it coming through? Not too loud, is it?
I can't hear it.
So here's my little silly theme song that I wrote. It's a little too loud, so I'm just going to try to. It's my little silly theme song that I used to end the show with. Sarah, thank you so much for being part of this with me today.
No worries. Thank you for having me on.
And if anybody has any questions before we leave, let us know. If not, the praise we will take and a thank you for it. So if not, then I think we will say goodbye. Sarah, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Just want to thank you again, and I will see you somewhere in the Azure advocacy world.
All right. See you later.
Bye-bye. Well, that was Sarah. She was really great. I love doing this because I get to have conversations with people that I work with that I don't always get to have conversations with. It's really, really awesome. And because of that, I appreciate just the time I get to spend talking about Azure. I know it's not a tremendously world-relevant, most important thing to talk about, but to be honest with you, it's something that I'm able to help you with right now. And as the world seems a little weird, a little scary, we can at least try to do this together, maybe talk, have a little fun, and learn something. And so that's really what I'm trying to do, is just to keep everybody feel a little positive and to do this alongside with you. So I want to also let you know that while I do have other people from Microsoft on my weekly show on Thursday, I'd love to hear from you if you'd like to be part. I do other streams during the week. I'd love to talk to you about your learning more about Azure. If you want to do maybe a one-on-one session and maybe I can teach you how to do something, or maybe you could teach me how to do something. If you got an interesting product that'll work along the fundamental part of Azure, you could look at that too. We could look at some of the different tools you're interested in, anything. This show is first and foremost about making sure that the people watching it are getting the most from it. So your interactivity, your information, and of course your advice on how to improve it is only going to make this a better experience for the two of us. And that's all I can hope for. So that's really it for this week. Once again, thanks so much to Sarah for being a part of this fun stream. So until next week, this is Jay. I will catch you then. So long, and have a great weekend.